Namaste. So I'm here today to talk about the Pitta constitution or Pitta Dosha. In Ayurveda, as I've mentioned in the previous video, we are divided up into constitutional types. So one of the constitutions is predominantly Pitta, which is a fire-water type. Or you could have the combinations. So a person could be high in Pitta Vata or Pitta Kapha, and that would add a little bit of a moderation to the type. But some people are quite high in Pitta and then lower in Vata and again lower in Kapha, for example. The Pitta type is fire and water. So imagine what that would be like. With the water-fire alchemical combination, we get a little bit of an oil type, an oiliness. Also, Pitta is represented in the body by hyperacidity or bile. So these types can digest really well. They have that fire of digestion at the navel. And that's an excellent attribute of this type, is the ability to digest. However, the fire can also, if out of balance, lead to high blood pressure, hyperacidity, which then creates other fiery issues in the body like rashes, prickly heat, and things like this, or rosacea, acne, things like that. Also in the temper, a high Pitta constitution can be quick to temper. That said, they're also quick to digest information through the eye, through the sight. They're very, like symbolism can be very meaningful for them. And they're very logical, and they tend to be quite linear and able to execute, have the stamina, unlike Vatas, to really execute a plan in a very effective manner. So Pittas can be highly sort of spatial, rational, and would be great, scientists and engineer types. They often have great sort of mathematical ability. So there are a lot of talents to the Pitta type, but as we learned with the Vata dosha explained previously, we just need to learn how to pacify or how to support the tendency so that it doesn't go too far to excess. So we're just trying to bolster that. So for this sun type, which is fiery at the navel in terms of the physical body, in digestion, the acids of digestion, etc., or like as things like bile in the gallbladder, we also find, interestingly, that energetically, the fire type is also the navel chakra. So where we see a difference or an opposition in the physical and esoteric sites of Kapha and Vata, for Pitta, we see that the energetic aspect and the physical site of accumulation are in the same area of the body and the subtle body. So how to notice the Pitta constitution if somebody is high in Pitta dosha? So we'll notice firstly that they tend to be very muscular and athletic. So they like to utilize the body for physical activity or athletics. They're very competitive in nature, so you'll often see them in sport. But notice that fire it's light, but not as light as the air ether type. So you may find, again, that they have long, lanky bodies, but not quite as lean as the Vata predominant type. They'll have a little bit more mass, but long, muscular bodies. You may also notice with the Pitta dosha a little bit more symmetry than with the Vata. They tend also to have for example, a red-haired person, where that manifests. Red hair would be a sign of that heat in the body, that redness in the body. Or also extremely straight blonde hair could manifest. That could be sort of a clue to you of the Pitta dosha. But other aspects, you would look for heat in the body, for example. So a Pitta person can be warm even in winter. where we talked about the Vata person wearing a sweater in summer, you might see a Pitta person wearing shorts and a t-shirt even in winter kind of thing, or dashing from their car on a snowy day but wearing shorts because they know that when they get inside to wherever they're going they'll be warm. So this is a sign of the Pitta, is that heat in the body. So a lot of the antidotes for Pitta, we're going to be looking at things to pacify the temper, to cool the humors, but also to cool the body, because with the heat it can crop up as sort of rashes or redness. You may also see with Pitta people a sort of a ruddy constitution or a complexion in the face, so redness in the cheeks and things like that. So lots of talents of that sort of micro thinking and execution of the Pitta, but how can we pacify, how can we work with this? So oiling is often something that I look at. So for the Pitta constitution, because they also already have a bit of oiliness, we'd be using a little bit lighter oils. And for example, only in the summer, maybe using a coconut oil, a cooling oil on their bodies, and then they would probably need to blot the oil afterwards. We'd also be looking at using a lot of cooling properties. So things like melon or coconut water, let's see, cooling herbs like coriander and fennel. These types of things we'll often see in lassis that people drink in the summer in India. You may have a lassi with rose water, or you may have a fennel flavored lassi. And again, these are all the very cooling herbal properties. What to notice about Pitta food. So food that is already Pitta, that is already warming or heating, would be, obviously things that are red in color, or that have that sort of rich colored tones to them, like red chili pepper or red lentils. Other things that tend to be a bit fiery that are noticeable, like garlic and onion and things like that. Mostly we'll see that they have some heating properties, although there are onions that have some cooling property as well, or a cooling aspect. So the interesting thing about doshas, as I said, a dosha is a factor of disease. So it's something that already we're leaning to a certain characteristic or a certain propensity. And so naturally we want to go further and further and further towards that. And we need to bolster that. We need to balance that out. Not completely balancing it, but supporting it so that it doesn't become extreme. So unfortunately, you'll notice that you'll have these inclinations toward what you already are. And so, for example, in a Pitta person, that would manifest as being really interested in hot food and curries and things like that, to really enjoy the hot food, or to really enjoy demanding physical activity that's heating. But then noticing that you may be really keyed up, or almost have a little bit of an aggressive feeling after working out. So what we're gonna do for that, other than using like the cooling oils and the cooling herbs, is also just to notice that, and to say, if you're gonna have heating foods, then you'll also have to have things like the retas. Retas are like cooling yogurts that go along with spicy foods. And in reta, again, you'll often see things like fennel, but you'll also see cucumber and things like that that are cooling and sort of watery, refreshing. So we'll need to balance what you're doing. Also with the athletics, a yin-yang class, for example, would be perfect for the Pitta dosha. They need to be able to move the body. They need to be able to circulate that energy, that natural energy that they have. But closing a class with a really good relaxation, or a nice yin segment, a more passive segment, would be fantastic. And I'll explain why in terms of the body as well. is that Pitta people often have very narrow, tight hips. So the yin classes really work on this area of the body of lengthening and toning the ligaments and deep into the tissues in this area of the body. So let's say a wide angle forward bend. You're going to work with the hips and these interior thigh muscles, which are very tight in Pitta people, and holding those forward bends for a lengthier time. So that would be something you do in a yin practice that would be ideal. Also, because Pitta people tend to be, let's say, runners, having a really good stretch as a part of your athletic routine is great for Pitta people. And sometimes they'll shortcut this, the stretching out or the cooling down. They'll want to cut short those types of routines. But if someone's running, 5 times a week, having 1 or 2 yin yoga classes in their routine is a great way to stretch out also those hip muscles and those ligaments in this area of the body and all of the running muscles. It would give a cooling and a grounding aspect to their natural constitution. Now that we're into this idea of yin and yang and how to capitalize on the natural energy, but to bring it down and to bring it into a cooling arena, what other postures can we think of that would be cooling, stabilizing, stilling, pacifying for the solar type? Lunar postures like moon pose. And again, anytime you do a leaning posture like a moon pose, you're working also the area of the belly. So you're pushing that acidity through and just flushing it out. Twisting also, we said for Vata for the same reason, for moving through the wind, but in Pitta it would be for sort of moving that acidity along. The twisting postures are very good for the kidneys, very good for the liver. So that would be wonderful. Also, try doing the sun salutation, these very solar postures, or doing the beautiful back bends that they would have such the propensity for, like wheel pose, but doing them in a stable way. So slowing down your sun salutations. A Pitta person might tend to want to really rush through the sun salutation. So really doing it in a fluid way, but a little bit slower than would be natural for them. Also, really always remembering the counter poses. So if you're going to do these deep back bends, like the full wheel chakrasana, which are very igniting for the navel chakra, the solar chakra, remember always to do the child pose or the wind relieving pose afterwards. A gentler back bend, like fish posture, which comes right after the shoulder stand, this is beautiful for the Pitta type because it moves from the navel up to the heart chakra. And with the opening of the heart chakra, we have that love, the forgiveness, letting go. So shifting that temper up to this more allowing, letting go, forgiving chakra that is very, very beneficial for the Pitta type. Watch, although the inversions are important, and I'll explain in a moment, just watch headstand, because headstand, being right on top of the head, has a heating aspect to it, whereas the shoulder stand has a cooling aspect. And I just want to explain that a little bit. So normally the fire is rising up, yeah? So from fire at the navel, that heat rises. But when we flip upside down, as in the shoulder stand, and we're sort of compressing at the throat and the toes are up, we're inverting. The fire is still rising, but then it's rising towards the toes. So shoulder stand will move the fire to point towards the toes, which are up towards the ceiling, and it'll allow the cool lunar ojas energy to be preserved in the third eye, in the area for meditation. And so the eye is very pitta in terms of gleaning, absorbing knowledge. But here we're going to try to keep some coolness in that area for meditation and for preserving the cool of the temper. So that brings me to an interesting practice. Since pittas are very strong in attention and in concentration, they can be great meditators. They can be great meditators on focusing on one point, but let's choose carefully. Rather than the candle flame for tratak, for example, we will use the full moon or the reflection of the full moon. The full moon is very cooling. It's also very ojas rich. This would be a beautiful type of meditation for a pitta predominant person. Also, meditations which are a little bit more diffuse can be great for calming the pitta. So if they could learn a slightly more vivata style of meditation, that would be like a meditation on space. They can capitalize on their capacities for concentration, but in different ways to also pacify the pitta. I'm thinking also, we talked about love, increasing the devotional aspect of the meditation, which may not be as natural to the scientific pitta type, but meditating on a murti, for example, like a determined murti like Shiva, might be attractive to a pitta person, but to try and cultivate that sense of universalism, that sense for universal love or devotion, reverence, this can be excellent for pacifying the pitta, but also capitalizing on their capacity for concentration and meditation. So I'm wearing a sandalwood mala. Sandalwood is a wood with very cooling properties, and it's a great mala to be worn by pitta people. It can also be used in devotional practices, devotional japa. Sandalwood can also be turned into a paste, and we see it, you can put it as a tilak on the third eye or paste that's used across the forehead. And this is very cooling as a paste. And again, it's usually done at the end of a reverential practice. And the surrendering aspect of some of these reverential practices is wonderful for the pitta type. There are many other things to say for pitta. Pranayama. Pranayama can be heating and very fiery, but we also have cooling pranayamas. So analoma viloma, it's very balancing, cooling, and integrative. But even more so, you can do Chandra Bedi pranayam, which will focus on the left nostril, the cooling line of the nadis. You can also do Sitali or Sitkari, and that is where there's an intake of the cool breath with a curling of the tongue. So these practices are extremely cooling. If you're having sort of a hot flash or it's a very warm day, these are wonderful practices just to perform at any given time. So I hope that this gives you a bit of an idea about the qualities of the Pitta constitution, but also how to pacify and cool with simple yoga pranayama practices, the use of specific herbs, and also using the capacity for concentration, but with a cooling ojas-rich element like the trataka on the full moon. And just remembering that all constitutions have great aptitudes, but we're just trying to mitigate the factors of disease or the factors of imbalance that the propensities can cause in us. And if we do that, then we can usually really capitalize on the talents and support or balance those things that may tend to go towards the excess. Namaste.